Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whenever you happenstance into this Truth Bomb Riff, my name is Patrick Lovell, and this is the 755th edition of these Truth Bombs, now spanning 4 years, delivering truth in the service of liberty and justice for all, not just in the United States, but also around the globe. And I'm joined this morning by my friend, my colleague, somebody who I always want to hear from, but particularly on the heels of all of the information that's been coming at us fast and furious, my friend Regan Boychek, the hardest working PhD in economics and journalism, north of the 40th parallel, of course, 44th parallel. Is it 44th? 44th parallel, right?
49th,
49th.
49th, but no PhD.
Yeah. But the long and the short of it is that as we begin to unravel the stakes and the state of play, I want to tee up a couple of things first, just for conversational sake, just because it's news, of course, and I like to try to start off with news. But the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, struck down. Obviously, and this is going to have a big impact in Canada, I would imagine, as well as, of course, just the rest of our trading partners globally. But this will be interesting post Mark Carney via Davos. But the Supreme Court, knocked down Trump's tariffs activity because it was unconstitutional from beginning, and even a corrupt Supreme Court can see that. And I'm kind of a little bit shocked that they didn't consider that a bridge too, or that they did consider it a bridge too far. So that's one bundle in a bucket that we could certainly explore. But second, I have to mention that I'm just really giddy, to be honest with you, to get your reaction to the arrest yesterday of Prince Philip. I believe he's Duke of, how do you pronounce it? Mount,
No idea. I've never heard anyone say it. I've only seen it in print.
Okay, well, it'll come to me in a minute, but it was kind of interesting that that's how, of course, King Charles addressed him when they announced the arrest, and the whole kind of flow of information from Buckingham Palace is slightly different than what happens with the propaganda of Caroline Leavitt and the White House press corps. But certainly, definitely food for thought. But the last piece of information that I want to just tee up for you, and then we can go into it because obviously where you helm from, we should certainly talk about as well in terms of the separatist initiative. But going back, I'm being a pinball here for a reason because I know we can keep all of these thoughts in our heads simultaneously. But I spent roughly 4.5 hours yesterday combing through the congressional deposition of none other than Les Wexner, and I've got about an hour and a half to go. And I got to tell you, I discovered a lot of information that, of course, mainstream media is nowhere near being able to put the pieces together. And we'll be able to endeavor that as well. And the last point, just to kind of tee up why the importance of our discussions matter. I had done a truth bomb riff earlier this week that really ties together the last 14, 15 years of my life and 13 years of my work. And it went about, I want to say, 2 hours and 14 minutes. And it has information that completely is bulletproof now because the last piece of the puzzle was this revelation of the general counsel of J.P. Morgan Chase, a woman by the name of Catherine Rummel, who came out of the Obama administration, was on the prosecutorial side in the Enron developments, and then she jumped ship and became literally the general counsel of the world's largest giant vampire squid, and was there during the IMDb scandal, was there during all of the information that I have by way of SCOTUS and the Arkansas Teachers Pension Union and more information that I'll go into. But it is the $71 trillion truth that is concrete in a way that maybe even is even more so than it ever has been, even though it has been from the beginning, my friend Reagan. But further to that point, I happened to, because Epstein is trending online this morning, I happened to, blast this all over the place. And I was basically spamming that truth bomb. And one guy came back to me and he said, bruh, your video is 2 hours and 14 minutes long. I've got some advice for you. Keep it down to about 10 minutes. And I thought to myself, and I actually said this, he said, keep it brief. That was his his offering. And I said, okay, you're an idiot. Is that brief enough? Because as everybody is looking at this insanity and they can't keep up because of the flood the zone, it's all right in front of our face, Reagan, in a way that it's never been before. So crystal clear what we've been in the midst of for the last 30 years, which of course you tie back to several hundred years, several centuries. So now that I've gone on for like 20 minutes, I'm going to let you riff. You take me anywhere you want to go, and I'll interact when I feel compelled. But brother, I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think your preamble, you touched on so many of the dimensions of the things we've both been studying. And the premise, my grand political theory, is that imperialism repeats. And that's it. That there's a logic to rentier power, and it all that my research pursues is the theory that this is repeated over the centuries, that these interests, these situations, and what you describe reminds me of a incredible moment, the turning point of U.S. Canadian relations. Saturday night, August 17th, 1940. The Prime Minister of Canada is alone in New York State with President Roosevelt and his Secretary of War. They're spending the evening on the presidential train. There's 100,000 U.S. troops ready outside the train on the Canadian border, ready to invade Canada in 1940. And they're having a very lovely dinner, an impossibly large steak. The president's wearing his favorite suit, and they're waiting to hear the news that President Roosevelt's Republican challenger is launching his presidential campaign that night. And in his hometown, he's giving his speech as the Republican candidate, and he knows that the U.S. is about to absorb Canada as a colony. He knows that the Prime Minister is there in New York that evening to sign a treaty to subjugate Canada to the United States as a colony. And they get the news over the wire and they read it together. And the Secretary of War says that fits our plan like a puzzle piece. And when you have such a clear understanding of how Wall Street works, and these amazing revelations of the Epstein class come out, and everyone is confused, and everything they ever told you, every theory they spun about how things works, falls away. And everything that comes out every morning fits together your story like a puzzle piece. And it's the same with me. And the most amazing thing I've recently discovered is that these stock market hijinks that Bill Black busted in the 80s and 90s, that you were a victim of 20 years later, they're still going. We're staring at another giant one yet, and everyone's playing dumb. And it turns out this is the exact same pattern of every stock market bubble there has ever been. And you go back to the first one in 1720, the Mississippi bubble and the South Sea bubble were royal conspiracies. That was Queen Anne and the deep state, who there was no real parliament. They controlled both parties. They created the South Sea Company as an act of parliament, modeled on the East India Company, and basically just a tool of imperialism. It's going to go steal stuff from all over the world and supply money to the home country. And this time, shareholders, the public can buy in. That's when they invented newspapers to sell this stock. So stock market bubbles and newspapers were both invented to facilitate this sort of financial fraud from day one. And in 1720, it destroyed the French Empire. They collapsed. And moments later, at the same time, there's a simultaneous bubble in Britain that looked all the same, except there was one difference, one key difference. The French Empire collapsed. It was gone. They had no more financial system, had a revolution 80 years later, destroyed them. Britain took over. The secret, the difference of both stock bubbles, they both robbed all the public. France tried to take money back from people, weren't very successful. Britain never even tried. But the difference in Britain was they had a central bank. It wasn't called a central bank. It wasn't actually controlled by the public. But King William III had founded a private bank, the Bank of England, and it played that role. It steps in at the last minute and saves all the rich assholes that destroyed this, broke, blew everything up. And that's exactly what happened in 1720. France collapses, and they didn't have a real central bank. They didn't just print trillions of dollars and rescue everything until you could steal enough in the future to make up for it. But Britain did. And that was the beginning of the British Empire. That's what allowed that they wiped out all their debts, were erased in the collapse. They had new liquidity to go to India. And it is that fraud that became a major driving force of the American Revolution. Cato's letters, the most influential book amongst the founding fathers, was written in the aftermath of the South Sea bubble, critiquing it, laying the foundation for much of what found its way into the Constitution, um, and bearing within the seed of the American experiment the root of this financial fraud, and that it was created in opposition, and technically the checks and balances are there. It could stop this, and Bill Black proved you can, so we don't have any excuses. But that's why this keeps happening. That's why we can't get journalists to get the story straight. That's why academics keep falling for it over and over. This is how the Epstein class enriches itself on our backs with this hype, with AI, gold, silver, real estate, whatever. That's how they rob us blind. And they don't have to be smart. And Jesus, do we know now that they aren't? I don't know what Elon Musk has done, but if I I've seen him talk, and you have to show me something else if you're going to tell me that he's smart or some sort of global
Dude, he's like every
brain.
other CEO for the last 30 years. They're just a face that's basically a vessel that feeds off of, literally loots all of the brain capacity that created these entities, and they become there to pump and dump that he's in this matrix. And I don't even think, in fact, I don't think, I know Elon has zero comprehension of macroeconomics. He thinks that, of course, the United States can go bankrupt. Now, we can talk about what happens after BRICS. We can talk about after treasuries, and that's a little bit maybe further downstream. It seems to be accelerated by this global cabal that obviously Trump is an expression of. But I want to circle back here real quick to just a couple of other things and platforms to get your mojo rolling, man, because that was brilliant. That it was brilliant contextualization. And I kept thinking to myself throughout my entire process, and it took me 14 years to get to the acclamation point of it's not rocket science, it's racketeering, first and foremost, to your point that they're not smart if you know how to ask the right questions. What I cannot believe, because I was raised, not raised, actually, I was raised. I was raised to ask questions. I was raised to think through the process. I was raised because I was around smart people in my family who were pretty successful, who were accomplished, achieved greatness because they worked really hard. So I understood the value of actually putting in what you get out, sort of thing. And that's always been my mindscape, quite frankly. But I ran into the wall after the 2008 great financial crisis, where I'm looking around thinking to myself, wait a second, is it simply as easy as institutions failing because they're all corrupt? And it took a while to put all the pieces together and the sequence of it. But yeah, that turned out to be the case because, to your point about you can't get journalists to actually, do the actual work, which we haven't had journalism for 25 years. Now, a lot of people are reacting, of course, to this last vestige of what is the nail and the death knell and the coffin of the freedom of the press, which is part of Project 2025. But when you look at Larry Ellison, okay, of Oracle, and his contracts within the techno bro technocracy, techno feudal state, and all of those things that made him the second richest man in the world, maybe the richest depending on the day, of course. But of course, right away, he puts in this Barry Weiss character who is just a propagandist of the utmost pathetic, culture of this downstream Epstein effect, first and foremost. And what I've been really tracking on recently, because I've had this interaction with David Enrich, who's now the deputy director of investigations for the heralded New York Times. The New York Times, which is the paper of record in the United States, who, of course, during the 70s gave us such great hits as the Pentagon Papers and all things that would lead up into Watergate and all of these other moments when there was a fourth estate, which led to, of course, at the time as well, culturally, all of the influence that came down on me through gonzo journalism, right? With a twisted rock and roll sort of demeanor with the freedom and libertarian ethos, but at the same time, seeing the forest for the trees, that these bastards are corrupt, they lie, they steal, they cheat, and unless you take them down, they will destroy everyone. So I came from that generation. And to your point, in the late 90s through now, we had private equity, we had hedge funds, we had junk bonds, we had this, that, or the other financialization that not just wiped out the entirety of the American economy and then the global economy because it's imperialism, as you've now said, because we've got the final piece, which is the most important piece, which is the central bank, which of course you just illustrated had its origin story in England at that time period after the South Sea bubble, which is amazing to be able to put all that together because it is intrinsic in the smash and grab imperialism that sets this whole tone, but without the media, right? Without the media does the work. Now, we have had they've destroyed investigative journalism. That's what led me on my journey. I was asking the questions, I put the things together. Now we're this repository of the entire story that Congress, the Supreme Court, the Department of Justice, the FBI, everybody else had buried. And now the New York Times, and they had on the front page yesterday, they had this story that said, what we're doing to investigate the Epstein files. And I thought to myself, this is 2026. They could have done this easily in 2005, 6, 7. They chose not to. And we could certainly speculate why that is. But I want to bring this full circle to Les Wexner in the 5.5 hours that I've got to sit through, but I've gone through 4.5 hours so far. So as I've learned, and that you've so brilliantly prefaced on several occasions, I've learned from the best in the world in terms of how you do investigations and what the theory behind them is. And when you understand the macroeconomics, the geopolitics, and then you understand the legalese structure, and then ultimately other things that I have still yet to bring to the table. And I'll just insert this last piece here, or at least in terms of the law. And during the Clinton administration, when we saw the deregulation, desupervision, decriminalization that came from none other than Senator Phil Gramm and his wife, Wendy Lee Graham, with the Clinton administration that would birth none other than Russell Vogt, okay? Russell Vogt came out of Phil Gramm's office. I don't know if you were aware of that, but that gave us Project 2025 because of the Heritage Foundation, X, Y, and Z. What I learned from Bill Black was how to do an investigation, how to ask questions. Now, I was always an inquisitive guy to begin with, but it wasn't until I understood that when you had the map of how things are supposed to work, can you understand what to look for? Then again, when you get the evidence, sequence things together to do what? To create the discovery, to create the indictment, to create the grand jury trial that then leads to convictions, which is the way the law is supposed to work. You take out any sequence of anything in terms of investigations and discovery, which the Supreme Court has done, but going back to that time period in late 1998, when you had Graham Leach Bliley that separated Glass-Steagall, that gave us the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, all of those things would lead to what you prefaced, which is the central bank replacing Congress as the power of the purse. Really, that's the shortcut that I delivered. Nobody realizes the power of the purse is the Federal freaking Reserve, not Congress, okay? And to any of you macroeconomists out there that want to challenge me, please bring it. I've got the receipts. But here's the thing that I want to hear you tee off on as it relates to the questions, right? I sat through this 4.5 hours so far of this investigation, or excuse me, the questions to Les Wexner. Now, it was the most pathetic garbage I have ever seen. We already know publicly that Les Wexner signed over for $1 the real estate in Manhattan. That was the single richest piece of real estate in Manhattan. in the towers of billionaires from around the world. The most exclusive piece of real estate was provided to Jeffrey Epstein for $1. Okay? Now, Wexner claims he didn't know Epstein, didn't know what he did for the company, didn't know how he's compensated, didn't know what the goings ons were, the moorings of their relationship, what he was involved with. He was like, I see nothing, right? What was that guy from Colonel, was it Colonel Kurtz? Or am I missing? You know who I'm talking
Oh
about?
yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's just the beginning of the weirdness, right? The I'm going to say the although they're getting to some really interesting things in the fourth and fifth hour, really buried at the end. I haven't seen anywhere in mainstream media, but the questions are so ridiculous. But here's what I'm trying to get to. We know who's got the answers. The Department of Justice and the FBI and the CIA have the answers. If Congress wants to get the answers, they're doing a show trial with people that have been mentioned with stuff that's been dropped, which are somewhat helpful. You want to get to the bottom of this whole thing because this has lasted for over 4 administrations. You go to those elements that I have just mentioned to you. Do you see that happening anytime soon in light of King Charles arresting, of course, what is it called? The not the Baron. I was something like the Baron Munchausen. Whatever, man. Prince Edward. So Prince. And now I can't even think of his name because I've been thinking about all this other stuff. Just react and run with it based on what I just said.
It is. I would have never learned about the key element that brings all this. This is a crazy story, and all the details, people might not think they affect them. But the problem is that these financial games are played on the back of oil. That's the difference for the last 50 years. We've had assholes for millennia, kings and queens wars, but for the last 50 years, because in 1971, Alberta, with all the oil, that belonged to America since 1940, since they signed that treaty in August 1940, they steal the oil in Alberta. They don't pay for it. And in 1971, Alberta became independent. We elected a local who knew the score, who wasn't dumb enough to say it out loud and never spoke, but we became independent in August 1971 for 15 years. And that was a crisis for the American empire. That's when the international gold standard ended. That's when Powell's memorandum went out. That was a turning point in world history when gold had been the basis for finance. Now there's gold and oil. And America had a few $1 trillion in its Canadian back pocket. It was going to start cooking. And that's what Bill Black found. They couldn't do it in Alberta like they'd hoped and planning to do, so it started in Chicago, where you got lots of mob and a little bit of the old oil. In California, lots of oil. Texas, where they could use that future free money to fill their pockets. And the problem is these financial games are played with carbon. And now we're at the end of that game. They have played so much of this game outside the bounds of law, but they can't escape the laws of physics. And we're at the end of that game. That there is a limit to how much oil finance collateral they can steal, and that is the conflict today. We have an American empire refuses to acknowledge the law or climate change, and it has enough carbon in its Canadian back pocket to kill us all, to ruin everything. And so unless there's the rule of law, they are going to dig up all that carbon, and you can make the best of whatever's left, but there's no hope. And the future for Canada, it's not that we're stupid. It's not this character or that character. It's that we're not free. And so our future has the piggy bank of a fading empire is very, very dark. There's the historical parallels or genocide, etc. It's
Well, yeah, I mean, you've already seen what Trump is capable of, right? He's willing to pull the trigger on anybody. That Mister. I like the nickname that Virginia from IHEB came up with. They call him Cankles, right? McCankles taco tits. Got to speak of this freaking this idiot. He is a freaking full raging idiot, but he's in control because of this. This apparatus of billionaires that have been feeding from the free spigot that we are both revealing. But I put the domino for both of us on our journeys as 9/11, right? Your journey at that point realizes that because of Rockefeller and because of all of these things that manifested before with these treaties and so on and so forth, with the way we understand how finance works, that we basically not only financed or the war was a diversion, but when you think of Bush the second, right? He says, look, don't worry about it. You don't have to serve in the military, which of course would then ultimately give us the guys that would become ICE because they were a little diehard and they did get the training. But I regress. But Bush was like, just consume, baby. Consume, consume, consume. Why? Buy the houses, buy the credit, buy the derivatives, buy everything that we're going to feed you through this financialization program. What we're going to do is we're going to bank it on future collateral of Alberta oil, not to mention whatever's coming out of Suez, yada, 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 going back to 71. But then we have this scenario now where it's like, okay, I've seen it since the 90s, really maybe 80s, but we have the technology, the paradigm, the infrastructure to maneuver into renewables and find a smarter transition that could work if, for example, thoughtful people like myself made up Congress that actually knew fraud when they saw it and they held it accountable, which they don't. Here's a little sidebar in terms of what Congress is. I can assure you, and I used to think this was just my mind kind of squeaking out because it just seemed too obvious, but I now know this is how they did it. These bastards in Project 2025, to your point of imperialism, when they got Citizens United, where they could fund in the dark, in the shadows, and all things Supreme Court, the nature of buying politicians that are as imbecilic as Marjorie Taylor Greene or that idiot that came out of Long Island, George Santos, and then pretty much every other Republican, on that side, they don't know anything about Congress. Those guys got put in, they got shoehorned in by these billionaires buying these elections to get them in to basically be their echo chamber, focus on what they have to focus on, and they know nothing about the nature of legislation, right? On the Democratic side, you've got geniuses that know exactly how to game the system, but they're owned by whom? The guys that are the imperialists that we are revealing, right? So, like I learned a long time ago on my first sort of mission towards this is about imperialism. This is about tyranny. As we're approaching the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution and the spirit of separation of powers and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, where the law is supreme, you and I both know the law is dead. The law is dead when you've got this Mad Magazine, Mad King, who's able to loot over $1 billion since last January, okay? On top of shooting American citizens in the street, threatening our neighbors, threatening Greenland. Your Prime Minister Carney, you've got a situation with separatist movement in Alberta. All of these things, kind of this fracture. You and I talk about this a lot. I think we both understand that the world is coming unglued, but it's the greatest opportunity in the world to move past this if millions of people could get their heads around the reality of the corruption, how it works, and most importantly, that we have replaced Congress and the power of the purse with the Federal Reserve and backdooring tens of trillions of dollars to this international cabal of criminals. And quite frankly, I'd say that all emanates from intelligence, if you want to know the truth, i.e. CIA. And I know, and that I've revealed that it was Rajan Cohen, the general partner of Sullivan and Cromwell, who actually created the CIA, who was there to negotiate on behalf of the 13 largest banks when we did this backdoor bailout of tens of trillions of dollars after the 2008 great financial crisis. And last word on that, I found Steve Bannon did an interview with Jeffrey Epstein, and he asked Jeffrey Epstein, among all these other weird things that were taking place, but two things that are absolutely huge. He said to Jeffrey Epstein, you were in jail the day that the world collapsed on September 15th. What did you do? And Jeffrey said, I had two calls. I made it two calls. One was to Jimmy Kane, the CEO of Bear Stearns, which I had a sizable investment in through what was known as liquid capital, who hit I think Putin's money may have been involved with. And B, I called JP Morgan Chase, Jess Daly, the CEO, right? He was about to replace Jamie Dimon. Now, Jamie Dimon, by the way, just so you know, came out of Bank One. Bank One was in Ohio working with Columbus and Les Wexner. And by the way, nobody on that committee to ask questions of Les Wexner asked any questions about JP Morgan, or excuse me, Jamie Dimon and Bank One and Air America that ultimately was financed by Citi, which puts all of this stuff together. So I'll pull out and I'll give you the final word on this whole thing from your vantage of Alberta separatism, tariffs, Greenland, Canada, gold medal match between Canada and the United States. And where else you think is important to close this out? Because we both know if we don't get ground to get the law back on the side of the people, the whole world's going down the drain faster than we can freaking snap our fingers.
That's the real, I mean, things are moving really fast right now, and people are learning a lot of what you and I have been studying and talking about. They're seeing it every day, but there's a little bit more. The the details of what you and I know is the missing piece that everyone needs to make sense of tomorrow morning's news. And within that is the solution, because that rule of law, what's really going on, the scale of it, and what the consequences of fixing it would be, solves all of our problems. And I think the way, and imperialism is the way to think about it. I mean, Les Wexman wasn't Israeli. He's American. He signed away his fortune to some straight. Okay, like obviously he's intelligent. Obviously, you guys have a couple $1 trillion you spent. There's a big obvious. Okay, just stop pretending about all that and just look at it straight. It's not that complicated. And the way to think about the most amazing thing you've
Let me put this
revealed to
together real
me.
quick. I've got to interrupt you just real quick on that point. His wife, Les Wexner's wife, was a partner at Davis Polk, one of the top legal, tall building law firms in the United States. We know she doesn't come cheap, and we know she doesn't come stupid. To think that his wife was managing business and not know anything about all of these things that were going on with Epstein doesn't strain credulity. It's absolutely stupidity. And the fact that people aren't following up with specificity in the dialogue with discovery is really what this is all about. They can still hide the flag, right? They can still keep this shit in the shadows. And it's like, because people who are asking the questions don't know what questions to ask. I'm sorry. Please continue.
It's really hard for folks to make sense when the media are part of this. The media are bad faith. They cannot be honest. That's why they're so stupid. They make up endless because they cannot. That's the only rule. When you serve elite interests, you can't be honest. You live in a democracy. You say it out loud, it's not going to be very popular. So just that, so they're not help. But it's not that complicated. People are more than capable of understanding it. And that's the way to think about Federal Reserve 13.3. That's that's the South Sea bubble. That's the imperialism trick. $71 trillion, and that's only, they didn't use it for a century. It's a very recent use, and it seems to sort of be tied to the financialization of $9 trillion of stolen oil in Alberta. In 2003, $9 trillion appeared, and because of that dinner on the train that was owned by the Rockefellers, that's the collateral that appeared on April 9th, 2003 in the Rockefellers' pocket, $9 trillion. All they had to do was lend it out and start cashing checks. And that's what happened. And they stole 9 trillion. And then 5 years later, you borrow another 9 trillion. And that's what 13.3 is a conduit for money from all over the world, resources that get translated and printed into American dollars in Wall Street accounts. all right here. And there's no accounting. And you can't even, except here in Alberta, I'm counting the money coming out of the ground, what makes it, and I'm just asking, where's the disconnect? Where does this money go? You look at the accounting, it doesn't add up. It's all kind of funny. It doesn't make any. Then you look at accounting. Oh, it's rigged. Oh, in 1917, okay, I see. Oh, and then it all makes sense. And all that we would have to do is enforce the law on everybody. They want us to believe they're at the top because they're so smart, but we know better now. The real reason we have an elite, they're not above the law because they're so smart. They're elite because they're above the law. That's because there's this special, the king and his friends are above the law. And because this bubble exists, they can do no, literally. And now we know in gory, millions of details, they can do no wrong. And so they're not very smart and they don't care about anyone else. And they don't really care if it works out or not. But the consequences are now existential for everybody. And Bill Black showed us it's possible. It's not that complicated. They lie, they cheat, they'll never admit it, and they'll have the best lawyers, and nobody knows it happens. Nobody knows Bill Black's name, but they should, because that's what Epstein class does, are doing, are about to do to us, and that's what's happening. And so that part, like 13.3, that's what you're offering, and you hear every day content trying to reach people because the media can't do this, won't do it. But if enough people knew this little secret, it could make such a big difference. And there's something very similar with Canada. Like imperialism is naked now, it's everywhere. He's kidnapped, except you may not speak of Canada. Nobody anywhere. They whisper about the 51st state, but there's a rule in Canada. You laugh that off. Oh, isn't that silly? Oh, that's so silly. Over and over and over and over. You're not really allowed to talk about Canada, but you can rest assured the people running Canada know they're not free, know what the real score is. And when they see the president of another oil rich country get kidnapped, they understand the message that if we got a little too, if we actually got our elbows up here in Canada, we'd know what happens. And Greenland is another, it's right next door. The US actually took control of Greenland in 1940, the spring right before they took control of Canada. And there was a whole international theater they played with the British and the Nazis about Greenland. They own it. And so when they talk about it now, everybody knows who really knows they own it, but they get the message. Trump isn't going to rule out military force to take Greenland. Well, every Canadian politician knows that probably goes here as well. And so what we have in Alberta is foreign control of the province of Alberta for a long time under a lot of different guises. So much so that both sides of the debate on lots of issues are the same American funded serving interests, including today with the separatist movement that grew out of the anti vaccine movement, coddled by the media. It's all this kind of new right wing YouTuber influencer. They all get paid in crypto and something, but it's all full time propagandists, exactly like happened in Alberta in the 30s. So we're right now in the middle of a separatist movement in Alberta, which we went through in the 30s. We had a same fraudulent political movement that took over control in the 30s, and we're reliving it again today. But it's terribly, terribly dishonest because they either don't know or aren't interested in the fact that it isn't Ottawa, it isn't the federal government that robs Canada, it's the Americans. And the reason everything is hard in Alberta is because the Rockefellers have been stealing everything that comes out of the ground for 70 years now. That's a lot. And that's why we can't pave roads or fund our schools anymore because we get a lot of money stolen by the Americans because we signed a treaty in 1940 making that the highest law. And so I keep asking these separatists who aren't very smart, aren't very nice people, but just Teflon, can't lose, just victory and just the arrogance of knowing Uncle Sam's at their back and the media is just kid gloves. They have this weird sort of arrogance, is this weird fringe minority, and I have a near 100% suspicion they'll be successful because America is behind them. And there's no way to double oil production from Alberta in a democracy on a finite planet. You're going to have tighter control over Alberta and its oil if, because they steal it. They're going to be interested in stealing more of it quicker. And that's just doesn't work with democracy. And so that's what the separatist movement is going in Canada. Mr. Carney is like liberals for 150 years in Alberta, is no friend of the Canadians, a servant to American interests. It was the Liberal government in 1898 that secretly sold the Canadian oil industry, imperial oil, to the Rockefellers, secretly. He paid every shareholder millions of dollars to keep them quiet so nobody knows about it. But that's who the Liberals are, and that's who they are today. And so if you know that Canada's a colony, and you just listen to Mr. Carney. Everybody else is all confused and they just love his speech. You just listen to it. He says nothing that contradicts anything about being an American colony. And whatever strategy he's pursuing in no way conflicts with any way of serving the American empire. And so he's not going to stop Alberta from separating. Neither is the current premier who pretends to be in opposition of the separatists, who happen to used to work for her and are now pretend to be the opposite. And so they have both sides, and that's the surest way to win the debate. But we're being robbed by the Americans, not the federal government. And if Alberta goes anywhere closer to being independent, it's not independent. It's closer to being an American colony. So we can get more of what we've endured. But like you knew Bill Black. You knew that there were people that could put an end to this. Here in Alberta, I have Peter Lougheed. It took me a long time to make sense of this premier who came in August 1971, quadrupled royalties, paved all the roads, built the schools and hospitals. Alberta was an awesome place. And then he resigned when he had like 95% of the seats. No explanation. He just resigned. And in hindsight, I know that he just acted like he owned it. He knew the score. He made him Canada, Alberta independent of American empire bloodlessly with no grief. And so, as crazy as it sounds, being a colony trying to escape, as impossible as those odds sound, we have Bill Black to prove that it's possible. We have Peter Lougheed prove it's possible to get away from American empire without a violent revolution. You just need to know how things actually work. And I've got Patrick and the con to thank for that. Uh, Making sense of the boot we've been living under here in Alberta, Wall Street, eventually put all the pieces together. And so the thing about the truth is that all these crazy little pieces every morning that come in the news, if you have a clear understanding, they should all fit together. There shouldn't be, if you're confused, if it's stupid, if none of it fits, then your model doesn't work. But your understanding of Wall Street and my understanding of the oil industry make sense of the craziness and point to the horizon, which it's not too late. And because it's a facade, because it's a lie, it is precarious. It's not as big and bad as it seems when it does that, but that money can disappear. And everybody's can see that and sense it, but we're in a dangerous moment where unless there's hope, the choice is just violent selfishness. The fascism is like absent hope. People need change. And that's the point, is to only offer violent fascism. And there is an alternative. It is possible. And whether or not it's too late, no one can know. And it's just our responsibility to do every bit we possibly can to push the ball down the field. And so that makes that this is scary, scary times. You couldn't convince anyone of this a year ago. But it can also be the most incredibly hopeful moment when it is possible, it is clear, and every morning it just reconfirms it. You're more and more confident every day that if we were wrong, things wouldn't make sense, but they do. And so it's the worse things are, the higher our confidence is. And that's what people are looking for. And there's nothing that even comes close as an alternative. But 13.3, using the banks to print money out of thin air, those that's just a contract for future surplus. And they've given out too many contracts. Elon has too many of those. Like, who is this guy, the second richest Ellison, who buys all this stuff? Nobody knew his name a year ago. He's a CIA contractor. Then, boom, like he must have got some really big contracts, or their stock price must have really done something that he just comes out of nowhere to be number two and buy a bunch of media up before the collapse. Like this is a script that has been replayed over and over and over and over, and using the media to sell us the fake lies or to hang out one royal when the real root of the problem isn't too hard to understand. It might have taken till dusk to make sense of it, but this is the last chance. There aren't going to be any more of these collapses. This financial one comes in America with the political collapse, the collapse of the rule of law, the collapse of the modern state. The much of the U.S. federal capacity is secret to much of what's wonderful about the United States is also being dismantled and can't be stopped soon enough. But this afternoon, the new Untouchables. Uh, those are the folks that people are looking for that not only prove it's possible, they can show us the way, uh, practically on all sorts of levels. Um, and that's why we got to keep doing this because you never know what's going to tip it one person. And the worse things get, the harder it is on the conscience. There's so many people within the system feeling the weight of it, seeing it. The whistleblowers are just coming and coming these days because of that. And so it's going to tip one way or the other. The elite are panicked. They are getting ready for something terrible. The rest of us should be too. But intellectual self-defense is the new Untouchables. That's the only place where you can go to get a sane, professional, detailed analysis. And what to do tomorrow just flows naturally out of that. But that's the missing piece. And now that we also understand why that's not available, like I went to journalism school, like that's front page news. Like, why isn't it? We all know, and it's so bad now. But there's still this. We do what we can every day, 755 times if we need to. Um, Tune in this afternoon.
Look, amen, brother. And I'm going to just say, thank you for the analogy of moving the ball down the field. I'm going to likewise to my friend north of the border, like moving the puck down the ice, right? Look, man, that analogy, that analysis of what's going on in Alberta really helped me tremendously, Reagan, because boy, I take it back to Steve Bannon, and Bannon is this interesting character. He is the devil incarnate. Ironically, he's projecting that on Epstein. They were both doing the dance together. But Bannon, he puts together this Breitbart scenario, right? He's got this hive think of these libertarian billionaires, most of whom are in his cachet, are super committed to Israel in this new version, the imperialism of Israel, expansionism of Israel, led by Sheldon Adelson and his sort of cadre. And this has been going on for a long time, long before October 7th, for example. But going back to Bannon specifically as it relates, and I know now more than I ever have that Bannon knows exactly who I am. Okay. I know this with every fiber of my being. When we released the con and our poster said the greatest conspiracy in the history of the world, criminal conspiracy in the history of the world, right? And we were all sold a lie. I am absolutely convinced Bannon got the idea. Hey, wait a second. That's how we're going to sell the insurrection, first and foremost. But when you were triggering all that, it brought me back to as much as I'm very skeptical because of the corporate media scenario of which Rachel Maddow fits, she did this really good work in what was called Project Ultra. And Ultra deconstructed America First back in the 20s, 30s, that were an expansion of what was coming out of Jim Crow that would lead into John Birch. But these guys were literally working with the Nazis. Okay. They were collaborating with the Nazis. They were trying to overthrow the United States at that time. They had, of course, a meeting, a groundswell in Madison Square Garden. I think it was 33,000 people right after the Great Depression, almost very similar shit that happened after the Great Financial Crisis. And you tie this together, it was really Fred Koch comes out of this stuff later because Fred Koch, I found out recently, created the John Birch Society. Imagine that. He comes back from building Stalin's infrastructure, makes all this money, comes back to create this Christo-nationalist fascism in the 50s, basically, with this consortium of oil millionaires out of Texas primarily. They create this ongoing scenario with America First that would then lead to Senator McCarthy trying to run for, after the Red Scare, the presidency by literally using documentation fraud in swing states through the Electoral College. All of this stuff predicates what's behind me, the Clean New Deal, and all of the other answers that we set forth that Reagan had inferred. But they are what you just described as the Albertan separatists. They're one and the same. Those guys, based on the way you describe that, that's exactly what they've been in the United States. And don't forget, the Confederacy was such an illumination that, of all people, Adolf Hitler built the Nuremberg laws based on Jim Crow. Okay, so this thing has deep roots. Maybe if people want to go back to the battle at the very beginning with the Constitution, after the because of the Three-Fifths statute and all of that, the Three-Fifths clause and all of that. I mean, we've been battling this the whole time, right? And so what is white supremacy in the South? Imperialism. That's what it is. That's what they did. So, I mean, look, it's always the same story. Imperialism repeats, and so does justice. And what we offer here, between myself, my friend from the North, and we stand united, and I hear this from people all over the English-speaking globe who see my stuff. They're like, my God, your Clean New Deal is necessary here in the UK. Oh my God, the Clean New Deal is necessary here in Australia. Oh my God, the Clean New Deal is necessary here in South Africa. And thank God for all of you beautiful Canadians up there who I absolutely have been inspired by. And I know there's a lot of asshole Canadians too, just like there are in the United States, right? But all of those of us who believe in the forthrightness of liberty and justice for all, the ability to solve big problems, the idea of dynamism, you all have to understand, because many of you are probably thinking in the back of your heads, okay, fucking capitalism, get to capitalism, get to capitalism. Guys, what we're telling you is this is socialism for the criminal class, the Epstein class. Said another way, that's imperialism. Did I get any of that wrong?
Absolutely not. And that's a really hard test for your and my theory. There was all those American fascists, Madison Square Garden, all that stuff that happened. And some people know about that. I've heard about it many times. Try to study it. Try to learn about it. You'll have a lot of trouble finding anything about it.
It was erased.
But it fits my theory, because what the British and American empires were planning for the First World War were teaming up with Russia to defeat Germany and to eliminate their continental competitors. And the Russian Revolution kind of short-circuited that. The British loved that. They loved revolution and ruining the Russian. They joined in the Russian Civil War afterwards. They loved that, but they didn't finish off Germany. And so that's why we had a Second World War.
That's right.
And or sometimes it's called one long war, because most of what happened in the 20s and 30s was to lure Germany into being dumb enough to attack Russia again so we could finish the job.
So true.
Creating a naive new political movement around Hitler and young idiots who didn't know the score. And in the 20s and 30s, America and British central banks financed Germany and brought it back up. And they didn't actually enforce the reparations that ruined everything. They created hell so they could get the devil. and then they nursed it back into a world conquering military force. How? What? American support, central bank trickery all throughout that. And so part of luring Germany into being stupid enough to attack our friend Stalin, who will destroy them, was pretending we're friends, pretending we're isolationists. It's just our hemisphere over here. You guys do your thing. This is our hemisphere. And so the Nazis, they can see 100,000 troops on the Canadian border. They're not idiots. No one else in the world was under any illusions, but at that moment, the U.S. was isolationist. It was, this is our, and they were saying explicitly over Greenland earlier that spring, this is your hemisphere. We understand the Japanese and the Germans, they have their things, but that's over there. This is our hemisphere. We'll mind our business. And so the Nazis let Greenland happen, let it fall to America, and they let Canada happen. They let it fall to America because they thought this was the deal. They're doing their thing and we're going to be able to attack. And as soon as Germany was dumb enough to attack Russia, the Americans started taking off their gloves and getting ready to really kick. It was over. They just mathematically, no matter what, you can't just, it's a mathematical, they're going to lose. And
Yeah.
it all switched. And so all of that happened. And then no investigation, no consequences, and nothing. It was a show and it worked. And the secret, the, the, the key to imperial history, the key to always muddying the waters is don't start the war. You can do 1,000 things. The media won't report it. The historians won't remember it, but get someone else to start it. And then it's just war and all's free and love and war. You can take off the gloves and do whatever. And so that's all of that stuff that has no explanation. It doesn't fit in anybody else's model. It makes perfect sense in this long line of central bank imperialism and fascism, which is just imperialism come home. That's how you treat the black folk in Africa or the poor people in Berlin. Whatever your scope of operation, that's what fascism is. And if all of Trump's tariff stuff was completely illegal, it's not what he ran on, but he destroyed every relationship with every. It's like they're girding for World War III, that
Absolutely.
illegally or not, whether he could or not, it's done. He did 1,000 times. If he had to do it 3 times a day, he has destroyed the relationship with everybody to ensure things will collapse in the world or repolarize.
Whew.
And we're going back to that moment of the 1930s where the US is saying, this is ours, and there's a NATO land line drawn all over the world, is this is ours, and Germany never got independent, and Japan never got independent after the Second World War. And so if they need to blow up a pipeline or replace a government in Canada or Germany or Japan, they can and will. And this is the time when they are circling the wagons and tightening their grip on everything they own and drawing a straight line between NATO land and the rest of the world, 85% of the population, BRICS, and everything that's fair and decent in capitalism is on the other side of that line because America is reuniting with King Charles and Britain, which has been a 200-year campaign to reunite the American and British empires. And that's who Trump is this rentierism, starting with oil, stealing stuff in the ground, has created an American aristocracy who follows the same logic that drove every other royal class in every other country, except these ones have nuclear weapons. And now finance is not played with gold, it's played with carbon. And there's a limit to that game. It's non-negotiable. And
Right,
so we
but
can't.
that's right. But they're so sick and depraved, right, that we see this eyes wide shut predation on children, and yet this, like, literally, you know, this imperialism. That's like I'm above the law. I mean, when I watched again, going back to the beginning of this conversation, Les Wexner, demonstrate that he's either got dementia or he's completely lying, and he's an accidental billionaire. Yeah, good luck with that, right? I mean, it was just like, you've got to be kidding me. But to close this out, because I've got to run, but this has been an amazing conversation. I thank you as always, Regan. But I wanted to close out with this. A thing that popped up on my feed the other day, I thought of you because it was just one of these TikTok, 7-minute features of like some sort of history. And it had a countdown of empires that had, murdered the most people in history. And I'm thinking, okay, what's it going to be? And I'm rolling through my mind, and I got the top five, not exactly in order, but I'm gonna run it down for you because this illuminates and it corroborates what you've always been saying from the very beginning. Okay, so I think in number six, they may have counted down the top seven, but I want to go with number six first. Number six was the Ottoman Empire. Number five was France. Number four was, I want to say, I'll have to come back to four because it was some amalgamation. It was probably Russia before the Soviet Union. It was I think it was Russia, during the Romanovs and that sort of thing. Then it was,
Bizarre.
yeah, the SARS, and then it was. Let's see, so that takes me to four, or that takes me to five. Four was Germany, and of course, when you think about Nazi Germany in World War II, and that they're four on the list, that says quite a bit, right? And then number three was the United States, and they counted down North American, Indian, genocide, and then of course world wars and all of these other elements. And I thought, and they put the number at like over 80 million. Okay, then they went into Maoist China, then the Soviet Union under Stalin, and number one, drum roll, which is of course what my man Reagan has been saying from day one, was England, the United Kingdom, specifically because of all of the action in India. They apparently killed over 100 million people in India. I didn't know that the carnage was that high. I knew it was high. I didn't know it was over 100 million just in the theater of India alone. So, look, man, imperialism repeats. The fact is that if you, me, and everyone you see, my friends who aren't a Nazi, and of course you can tell that Reagan and I aren't Nazis, who believe in liberty and dignity and equality and liberty and justice for all based on the integrity of law, then you got to discover the Clean New Deal. Because if millions of us unite behind the Clean New Deal, it is our destiny to purge the misery of tyranny, and not a moment too soon on the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution and all that it means, to create the renaissance of possibility. Can we find the money, Reagan?
Easy.
We can find the money, baby. We just have to stop giving it to the billionaire Epstein class illegally. And if you don't think that's enough to get you moving, I'm sorry, sit on the sidelines and watch the rest of us get it done, because I know there's at least 3.5% of you out there that are going to watch this. They're going to subscribe. They're going to share. They're going to discover me and Reagan. And I'll include some of Reagan's great writing down below. He's a fantastic journalist. We are literally the only answer to these lies that are coming every which way to Sunday. You have to understand that there are people that are knowledgeable, who know how to get the answers, who understand geopolitics, the law, and economics, that can put this shit together so that we don't have to live under tyranny. I thank you as always, my friend, in solidarity. I appreciate you with everything I am. And to the rest of you, please discover the cleannewdeal.org and, of course, the newuntouchables.com. Until next time, Reagan, I'll look forward to talking to you. Good luck to Canada. I'm sure it's over, but we got USA Canada today, and we'll see how that works out. Ironically, for gold, right? All the best, my
Hope
friend.
so.
Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.